behalf of SDPI, I welcome you all to the session on education methods in COVID response with the focus on gendered implications. May I please request our speakers to keep their microphones off when they are not speaking to ensure good audio quality for everyone. Speakers are also encouraged to switch on their cameras, especially when they are speaking if their network allows. The seminar will be recorded and the video will be posted online. You are welcome to revisit the discussion later and feel free to share it with your networks. We also invite questions from our audience and colleagues at the end or at the session as the session goes on. Please feel free to write them in the chat box on the right side. And please have the chat box open in the window as well. The session will also be telecast live on SDPI's Facebook page. For those watching us online, Facebook online and live, please write your questions in the chat there. All the questions will be conveyed to the speakers. First of all, I want to introduce myself. I am Rabia Tabassum, Senior Research Associate at SDPI. Today's session aims to have a gendered focused discussion by engaging people, including officials from the education department, practitioners, and experts. According to the results of a recent study of SDPI, around 46.8 million students got affected from the school closure across the Pakistan. The gendered implication indicates the disrupted education of around 15.9 million girls, that is around 44% of total primary and secondary level students. Existing response in the form of TV, radio, online apps played a significant role in continuation of education during the pandemic, but there are certain limitations, including digital divide, gender disparity in access, possession, and use of devices that may widen the existing gender gap. As currently we have 49% girls compared to the 40% boys out of school in Pakistan. And to further elaborate on this, today we have with us a galaxy of speakers. I would like to thank all the distinguished speakers. Today we have Ms. Umbreen Arif. She will be concluding. She will be concluding our discussion. She is education policy advisor at Ministry of Federal Education, and she has more than 20 years of experience in the field of education, providing policy advice, technical and analytical support. Recently, COVID-19 education emergency response. In that education emergency response, she has led the government of Pakistan's distance learning initiatives of Teleschool, e-Talim, and Radio School. And she is also working closely with the SDPI partners and development organizations. We also have at our panel Dr. Fouzia Khan from government of Sindh. She will be joining us late. And she brings over 20 years of experience in managing development programs and projects. She is currently serving as Chief Advisor Curriculum Wing with the School of Education and Literacy Department, Government of Sindh. We have also Ms. Wajeeha Bajwa. She is advisor at NORRAG, and she possesses over 8 years of experience in research, M&E and management of gender equitable international development programs. Her current analytical focus is on equity, particularly on gender, minority, and vulnerable communities. I also welcome Ms. Fajer Rabia Pasha. She is ED, Pakistan Alliance for Girls Education, and she is one of the leading advocates for strengthening education phenomena for girls in Pakistan. She has been a lifelong champion of girls' education and their rights. Ms. Pasha recently recognized as a top 50 key global influencer by EY's magazine Australia. And we also have Ms. Areebah Shahid. She's ED, Pakistan Youth Change Advocates and Malala Fund Education Champion. Ms. Areebah has worked in the development sector for over 13 years. She is also among the 12 education champions in Pakistan, working with Malala Fund to enhance girls' access to quality education. She is also the founder of the youth-led e-magazine. So I guess I should also mention here Malala Fund. This panel is being done in collaboration with the Malala Fund. We also have in our agenda MNA Mehnaz Aziz Khan, due to some urgency at her home. Unfortunately, she will not be able to join us. Now I welcome Ms. Areebah Shahid to present key findings of on girls' education in COVID-19. That is basically collaboration of PYCA and Malala Fund. And now and onward, the session is handed over to her for further proceedings. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Let me just share my screen before we begin. All right, I hope my screen is visible to everyone. I also hope that this PowerPoint will not become very excessively boring. PowerPoints are boring, I'm sorry. But I guess ये हम सबको support करेगा थोड़ा सा to understand. कुछ चीजें मैं बोल रही होंगी, कुछ चीजें screen पे नजर आ रही होंगी, so it would be sort of it would make it easier for all of us to get a sense of the study I want to speak about. I'm also very conscious of the time, so I will try to keep it very concise. So this summer, Malala Fund and all its partners in Pakistan conducted research to assess the impact that the pandemic has had on education as a whole, but with a very specific focus on girls' education. बहुत ज़्यादा मैं methodology की details में नहीं जाऊँगी again because SDPI was, you know, the one thing they hammered was time management. So I'm not going to go a lot into the detail of the methodology. But just to give you a sense, we were able to reach through all our partners 1,598 households, and हर household में हम एक adult caregiver से interview हमने किया और एक student बच्चा या बच्ची उनसे बात कर पाए क्योंकि pandemic थी and we wanted to absolutely minimize any risk of exposure for either the respondents or the interview teams. So the majority of the interviews took place over telephone, and because they were taking place over telephone, so बहुत सारी जो आप देखेंगे जो students हैं उनमें लड़कों की तादाद ज़्यादा है. 65% of the respondents who were children were boys, and only 35% girls, and that's because हमें बहुत जगहों पे permission नहीं मिली बच्चियों से बात करने की और हमने जाहिर है we wanted to be very culturally appropriate and sensitive, तो हमने insist भी नहीं किया. I would want to now very quickly first jump to the findings and then focus on the recommendations. Before I go into the findings, I want to emphasize two very important things. Number one, we're very conscious of the fact that the government has played an extremely instrumental would be a very small word to explain. They were very prompt. जो पेंडेमिक के फौरन बाद चाहे वो टेली स्कूल लॉन्च करना है, अभी रिसेंटली एजुकेशनल रेडियो लॉन्च हुआ है. So these findings are in no way an attempt to say all that's wrong. It's just our effort to contribute to the ongoing discourse. We're all learning as time is progressing. हम में से किसी ने पहले pandemics नहीं देखे अपने lifetime में. And so through this research, we truly want to contribute कि हमारी क्या learning रही है, and then learn. Umbreen Sahiba is here, learn from her. वो बहुत सारी चीजें जिनको government probably हमारी recommendations में से take up कर चुकी है, कुछ ऐसी चीजें जिनको अगर take up कर लिया जाए, and then also obviously most importantly explore कि हम लोग मिल के एक दूसरे का हाथ कैसे बटा सकते हैं, because the government has a lot of resources and that's great. But we are also very conscious of the fact that no single entity alone can perhaps overcome this challenge. And however we all can contribute, that is extremely important. जो हम लोगों का focus था research के दौरान, जिन households को हमने reach किया, हमारी कोशिश ये थी कि जो micro level पे, क्योंकि जो सबसे पसमानदा घराने थे, सबसे ज़्यादा impact भी financially उन घरों ने महसूस किया pandemic के आने के बाद, and so we tried our best to reach out to those households which lay somewhere towards, you know, the जिसको हम जो socio-economic strata, lower socio-economic strata जो होता है, हम उसको reach out कर सके And from among these households, majority of them had either already been struggling with cash crunches prior to the pandemic, but pandemic के बाद जो चीज बहुत दिल दुखाती है, sitting in our comfort zones, we don't realize is the number of households that actually reported food shortage. Why actually sort of taking a deep dive into the economic status of those families was important, because we wanted to understand the impact that poverty, or जो poverty aggravate हुई है pandemic के बाद, उसका fallout क्या होगा बच्चियों की तालीम पे. And so when we asked the students if they wanted to go back to schools once they reopened, तो एक बहुत overwhelming majority ने लड़कों ने भी लड़कियों ने भी कहा कि of course yes, once schools do reopen they want to go back to schools. But when we asked the same students about how optimistic they were if they would be able to return to schools, तो जो enthusiasm पहले सवाल में था वो enthusiasm हमने वेवर होते देखा. वो बच्चियां जो इंटीरियर में थी, वो बच्चियां जो प्राइमरी से सेकेंडरी लेवल पे या ट्रांजिशन करने वाली थी या recently उन्होंने किया था, those girls were significantly less optimistic of returning to schools. Girls in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Sindh across the board were less optimistic of their return to schools, and more importantly, girls in most of the areas that we surveyed were less optimistic than boys to return to school. वजूहात हमने इन बच्चों से समझने की कोशिश की कि वो क्या खदशात हैं उनके दिलों में, जहनों में, जिनकी वजह से उनको लगता है कि वो पहले स्कूल जा रहे थे और अब स्कूल नहीं जा पाएंगे, उनकी क्या वजूहात हैं. बच्चियों के लिए जो सबसे एक प्रोनाउंस्ड वजह सामने आई इस सर्वे के नतीजे में, वो ये था कि क्योंकि पेंडेमिक के बाद घर के हालात, माली हालात जो हैं वो खराब हुए हैं, तो शायद हम उनके वालिदैन फीस अफोर्ड नहीं कर सकेंगे. एंड फीस इज वन थिंग वी डू अंडरस्टैंड कि बहुत जगहों पे जो पब्लिक एजुकेशन है दैट इज फ्री, बट जो एलाइड कॉस्ट्स होती हैं उसमें ट्रांसपोर्टेशन है, यूनिफॉर्म है, बुक्स हैं, स्टेशनरी है, हाउसहोल्ड्स वो अफोर्ड शायद ना कर पाए, विच इज वाई बच्चियों का ऑप्टिमिज्म सिग्निफिकेंटली कम था. लड़कों के हवाले से जो चीज सामने आई, द बॉयज who felt that they might not return to schools, उनकी जो वजह सबसे pronounced थी, that was that they had already either entered child labor, and because their families now required more earning hands, so they had either already started earning or there was talk within the household that they will be expected to actively financially contribute within their houses. Distance learning वाले से again I want to acknowledge बहुत important काम हुआ है, and I think वो जो pandemic की वजह से, एक emergency situation की वजह से एक ऐसा push भी मिला है education sector को, that has sort of prepared us for future emergencies. But having said that, as far as the findings of our survey go, only 20% of the surveyed students were using teleschool. Only 2% were using radio for educational purposes. I understand कि जो educational radio है वो बिल्कुल अभी 1.5-2 हफ्ते पहले उसका nationwide launch हुआ है, लेकिन उससे पहले जो educational programs radio पे चल रहे थे वो सिर्फ हमारे सर्वे के मुताबिक 2% बच्चे जो थे उनको access कर रहे थे, और जो edtech platforms थे उनकी रसाई सिर्फ 1% बच्चियों या बच्चों तक के पास थी. इसमें एक चीज जो देखने की अहम जरूरत है वो ये है कि teleschool is excellent. I was speaking with Miss Wajeeha the other day, and I was telling her कि मैं मेरा अपने बेटे को भी बिठा देती हूँ, and he loves the content that comes on it. But there is perhaps not a lot of awareness वालिदैन में भी और students में भी, उन खासतौर पे जैसे जैसे हम इंटीरियर या रिमोट जगहों की तरफ जाते हैं कि टेली स्कूल, टेलीविजन के थ्रू, रेडियो के थ्रू भी लर्निंग को घर बैठे कंटिन्यू किया जा सकता है. एंड सो दिस इज समथिंग दैट वी नीड टू लुक इनटू ऑफ क्रिएटिंग ग्रेटर अवेयरनेस. एक बहुत अच्छा खूबसूरत टूल मौजूद है, उसको इस्तेमाल करने की जरूरत है, खासतौर पे अब जबकि स्कूल्स दोबारा क्लोजर की तरफ चले गए हैं. नंबर 2, एडटेक प्लेटफॉर्म्स बहुत बेहतरीन मौजूद हैं पाकिस्तान के पास, लेकिन ऑफ कोर्स एक लेवल प्लेइंग फील्ड नहीं है जब हम बात करते हैं इंटरनेट एक्सेसिबिलिटी की. एंड नंबर 2 जो प्रॉब्लम है वो बच्चियों के हवाले से है, और ये अक्रॉस द बोर्ड है, अर्बन एरियाज हो, रूरल एरियाज हो. We need to find ways to normalize the access of girls to the internet. बच्चियों से जब हमने पूछा कि आपके घर में 3G 4G है, बहुत सारी बच्चियों के घर में डिवाइसेस थी, बहुत सारी बच्चियों ने कहा हमारे भाई इस्तेमाल करते हैं एजुकेशनल पर्पसेस के लिए, लेकिन हमें इजाजत नहीं है, लड़कियों को इजाजत नहीं है. सो जो कैंपेन्स फ्यूचर में बनाते हैं, चाहे वो गवर्नमेंट लीड कर रही है उन कैंपेन्स को, चाहे सिविल सोसाइटी लीड कर रही है, वी नीड टू incorporate the element of normalizing girls' access to the internet for educational purposes. Quickly moving on to the recommendations, 10 minutes ho chuke hain, oh God. All right. So quickly moving on to the recommendations. First and foremost, now that we plan towards स्कूल रीओपनिंग, चाहे जनवरी में हो, फरवरी में हो, मार्च में हो, इंशाल्लाह जब होगी, वीर होपफुल के इस दफा जब स्कूल्स खुलेंगे तो हम एक बेहतर माहौल में स्कूल्स खोलेंगे. वैक्सीन की बात हो रही है, लेकिन दैट रिटर्न टू स्कूल हैज टू हैव a gender responsive strategy at the heart of it. And by a gender responsive strategy वो all out होनी जरूरी है, चाहे वो learning aspects हो, चाहे वो health and nutrition हो, चाहे वो availability of wash facilities हो schools में. हमें बच्चियों को सामने रख के strategize करना पड़ेगा ताकि हम उनको सिर्फ re-enrollment की तरफ नहीं लेकर आए, हम उनको long term retention की तरफ लेकर आए. Remedial and catch-up classes खास तौर पे उन बच्चियों के लिए, एटलीस्ट हमारी रिसर्च ये शो कर रही है कि एक बहुत बड़ी तादाद है बच्चियों की जिन्होंने स्कूल क्लोजर्स के दौरान जिनका जो लर्निंग प्रोसेस था वो कंप्लीटली हॉल्ट हो गया. तो अब जब क्लासेस शुरू होती हैं, चाहे वो समर स्कूल्स हों, चाहे वो कैचअप क्लासेस हों, a strategy needs to be in place to make up for those learning losses. And again, the government will have to lead from the front, and I keep emphasizing this, why the government the government is leading from the front, we acknowledge that also. But जहाँ पे बच्चियों की तालीम की बात है, आप लोग फ्रंट से लीड करेंगे तो it will make our job so much easier, because when a message comes from the government, उसका जाहिर है जो इम्पैक्ट होता है, जो उसकी ओनरशिप कम्युनिटी लेवल पे होती है, वो मुख्तलिफ होती है. जब सिविल सोसाइटी वही मैसेज देती है, उसको बहुत सारे मुख्तलिफ तरीकों से बाज दफे टेकन किया जा रहा होता है. सो इफ द गवर्नमेंट टेक्स लीड in promoting girls' education, in pushing families and households to send their daughters back to school, in normalizing their daughters' access to the internet, it will make our job much easier, but more importantly, it will make access to learning for our girls so much easier. हमने poverty की बात की है. We also understand कि बहुत अच्छे प्रोग्राम्स इस वक्त मौजूद हैं, स्टाइपेंड प्रोग्राम्स आउट ऑफ स्कूल बच्चियों के हवाले से. तमाम सूबे किसी ना किसी तौर इन प्रोग्राम्स को इम्प्लीमेंट कर रहे हैं, बट वी डू नीड टू अंडरस्टैंड कि पेंडेमिक के बाद सिचुएशन मुख्तलिफ हो गई है. अब सिर्फ हमें आउट ऑफ स्कूल बच्चियों को नहीं देखना, हमें उन बच्चियों को भी देखना है जो एट रिस्क हैं इस वक्त ड्रॉप आउट होने के लिए. उन बच्चों और बच्चियों को भी पीछे नहीं छोड़ना जो किसी डिसेबिलिटी की वजह से जिनको शायद प्रायोरिटाइज उनके अपने घर वाले ही ना करें उनकी एजुकेशन को. एंड सो वी नीड टू enhance, absolutely enhance the ambit of the current stipend programs across the board, including the federal areas, including the erstwhile FATA districts, जहाँ पे actually बहुत बुरे हालात थे. हमने पिछले कुछ साल में बहुत सारे गेन्स हासिल किए हैं, and this links us to our last recommendation that all the gains we've made regarding girls' education, and we've made some heartening gains in the last few years, We cannot allow this pandemic to take them away. We cannot go back to square one. And we have to strategize now. And we have to strategize together. However we can help each other, that's extremely important. Distance learning ho, उस पर हम बात कर चुके हैं. One thing that I would also request from the government is कि जो disaggregated data आता है enrollment और retention का, उसको platforms पे अगर publicly वो available हो, it would also help us as members of the civil society कि हमारी जो programming है हम उस data को सामने रख के उसको कर रहे हो, and then we'll also be in a better position to support the government when we have these figures in front of us. There is a declining trend, at least in some provinces, vis-a-vis the education development budget. Education budget हर province ने थोड़ा बढ़ाया है, but very honestly खैबर पख्तूनख्वा के अलावा जहाँ पे development budget में 43% increase आया है इस साल के fiscal budget में, तमाम provinces का जो पैटर्न रहा है, जो फेडरल एरिया का पैटर्न रहा है डेवलपमेंट बजट के हवाले से, वो थोड़ा परेशान कुन है. And we need to look into this. We understand we are not the richest country in the world. We are, we are facing एक बड़ा financial challenge. But ये challenge 70 साल भी और 70 साल के बाद भी रहेगा और 75 साल के बाद भी रहेगा अगर हमारे पास एक बहुत बड़ी unskilled, uneducated वर्कफोर्स होगी. तो अगर हम अभी एजुकेशन प्रायोरिटाइज नहीं करेंगे तो जो चैलेंज हम अभी देख रहे हैं वो चैलेंज हमेशा रहेगा. सो इट जस्ट मेक्स मोर सेंस to find avenues. And then please, one last thing I really want to emphasize, a lot of times we plan things keeping our finances in front of us. Let's just plan first और फिर बाद में देखेंगे पैसे कहाँ से आने, मिलजुल के कर लेंगे कुछ. But we need to plan first कि हमने अपनी बच्चियों को, अपने बच्चों को, सबको स्कूल अपने तमाम तर मसाइल के बावजूद किस तरह से भेजना है. And so for that, however we can support, we would always stand behind the government for that. And finally, because there's a lot of talk about single national curriculum, जो एक request है हम लोगों की तरफ से, that is कि इस दफा जब curriculum revision होती है, नई टेक्स्ट बुक्स आती हैं, can we please give our girls and even our boys more female role models to look up to. We have wonderful women in Pakistan contributing in the field of science, in politics, in the social sector. There are so many excellent role models that our children need to learn and our girls need to look up to. And so with that, I understand I have gone beyond my time. I'm sorry, I will conclude here. Thank you for hearing me out. And without further ado, we will move on.
Thank you so much, Areebah. If you allow me.
Ji.
Thank you so much. It's just a slight change in our agenda. As Ms. Umbreen Arif has to join another official meeting at the ministry, and she is kind enough to join us despite her commitment at the ministry. So please welcome Ms. Umbreen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rabia, and extremely grateful for the detailed presentation that you gave, Areebah. And I really loved your endearing style in which you try to soften your criticism, which you don't have to. I think that the strength of the researchers and the people out there is to be, forceful in the criticism that they bring to the table, obviously backed by evidence, as you have done. And I think government is always open to listen to this criticism and adjust our policies and reforms according to that. I will not take up everybody's time to quote the numbers again, because Areebah and before that Rabia has talked about the number of children impacted, and these have been very, very difficult times for all sectors, but especially for education, in which Pakistan was already lagging behind in so many of the indicators. And it's not just about the children in the schools, the children out of the schools, and the children who were already vulnerable and were the ones who we felt could drop out. So it's a big blow to the sector, and it has impacted all sorts of institutions: technical, vocational, madrasa, university, college, school, private. There are many anecdotal evidences coming from the low-cost private sector schools that support a large number of children in our country, that they may not ever open again because of the blows that they have suffered during this pandemic. So in some of the rural areas, that may also be something that parents will have to deal with. So moving ahead, I think I will try and focus on three positive messages that I wanted to share with everybody. And these are the three positive takeaways from what has happened during the COVID emergency. And those are things that we should focus on and see how we can take forward. One of the most you could say the most amazing thing that happened during COVID was that the narrative before COVID was all 18th Amendment, education is the responsibility of the provinces. But during this emergency, we realized that no, as a country, there are things that we need to coordinate, and there is a national consensus that is required for education decision making. We experienced that when we were taking decisions about whether exams will be held or not. And I still remember that there was one province that said, oh, we can hold exams. It's not so much of an issue for us. And then all the other provinces started panicking because they felt that if one went ahead and took the exams, what it would mean for the children in the other provinces, and how it would impact admissions in universities, even the promotion guidelines. So I think that I found this a very interesting takeaway from the COVID emergency on how we need to have a collaborative and consensus building narrative for education in Pakistan. Yes, implementation is the responsibility of the provinces, but when it comes to policy making and some other key decisions, we have to come together as a country and to take those decisions together. Again, this narrative building helped us coordinate school closures. It helped us coordinate promotions for more than 42 million children of Pakistan. It also is helping us take decisions for school reopening and the new school exams that will be taken in 2021, and university as admissions. As I talk to you, there is an ongoing meeting with all secretaries of education and interboard committee of chairman and exam boards that is happening on the same floor in the committee room that I have to go back to. And that group of people is discussing how to have a national narrative for our children. They're also discussing the successes of the home-based learning, how has it worked out, what are the things that are successful, and what are the things that we need to learn from. So this constant back and forth between the federal and the provincial levels, I think this has been one of the most positive takeaways from the COVID emergency. The other really important, the second one that I would highlight, is the use of education technology in education. This was something that we'd all been sidestepping, sort of saying, oh, it's expensive. Yes, it's a very good idea, and it may be a good idea for UK, America, but maybe, we need to concentrate on developing more books, etc. But when COVID hit us, it was very, very important to continue the academic process. And in that continuation, obviously, the education technology came to the front. Universities were able to adapt more quickly, had better tools, had better prepared staff that could take care of it. But for the public sector schools, and more than 130,000 schools, 150,000 public sector schools. It was a big question mark on how we take this forward. I think Pakistan was very, very lucky that we had some national, really good national edtech partners who came forward and offered their video lessons free of cost. Those video lessons are the ones that we are still using to run our tele school, and for the e-Talim digital portal that was launched a few days back along with the radio school. So they helped us at least get something out there for all children. PTV obviously was a medium of choice because of the reach that PTV has. Again, I think, like Areebah said, that this was an amazing response coming from the government. And this gathered a lot of international support for us. And there are donors who have now offered Pakistan money to develop more education content. So hopefully in the next couple of months, you will see that the tele school content will be further improving. The ministry has initiated a distance learning wing in the ministry. We have developed a new wing, and the purpose of that distance learning wing is to develop more content, work with the edtech partners to develop more content, and also look at how we can take this further, the distance learning activities further, because this is not going to go away. Hopefully, COVID will definitely go away, but we hope that the tele school initiative, radio school, and the e-Talim portal will continue to grow, because we see that the possibilities are just amazing. The possibility of reaching out to teachers who are weak in content through tele school and e-Talim portals, reaching out to children who do not go to schools, who should be in schools. So, again, the options of digitizing the accelerated learning program and offering it through this medium for the children who cannot go into a school, the options for adult literacy. I still remember when we started the tele school, there was a report that we saw on TV where there was a group of adults who were watching tele school, and they were saying that now we are learning ABC through the programs that are being shown there. So those are some of the key takeaways from us, and the point very well taken, Areebah, that we need to do more social mobilization and communication around it. It is just now that we've had access to the funds that will enable us to do more of that. We've tried to do it through the National Commission for Human Development, but we were not that successful. But now, as we move ahead in a structured design of the program that we've got the approval from the Planning Commission for, we'll be moving forward on that. The third very positive takeaway from for that I would like all of you to think about is that it brought out the vulnerabilities in the education system to the front. So the digital divide, the girls, it brought the minorities, it brought the lagging districts to the forefront. Those are things that were already there, but when you start thinking of, okay, I've provided tele school, but do all children have a TV at home? Do they have the laptop at home? Do they have, so I think the vulnerabilities of the sector were brought to the front. So these three important takeaways: the national consensus, building the use of education technology, which is here to stay and will be used in a blended way and with an improved technology, is something that we are building on. And the third most important is focusing on lagging areas, lagging communities, and taking that forward. Just want to share that the government has been able to generate funds, grants, and soft loans for a very large program that will be focusing on the lagging districts. And we have received support from the donor community as well as the government departments to take a program forward on this. Areebah, you mentioned stipends for girls and that we need to step up on that. Another good news on that is that the Wasila Talim program has now gone nationwide, and they have offered support to all children across Pakistan, because earlier they were in some districts of Pakistan, but now they have expanded the program. And the stipend offered for girls is more than that for the boys. So the focus is definitely on girls and encouraging parents to send more girls to school. The transition from grade 5 to grade 6, the stipends are already there. So the primary school level stipend through Wasila Talim is in addition to the system. You also mentioned data and availability of the data in a way that can help decision making. Just to let you know that we have been struggling with the calculations for the out of school children in light of the new census that has happened. The limited availability of the census data definitely tells us that we are way off mark in our calculations for the number of children in a particular age in a certain segment. So we need to actually do better calculations of out of school children. You may not see that in the next report that will be coming out, the annual school census, that we may not be able to do a calculation for out of school children based on the census data because of the census, the lack of census information that is available to us, but we'll do our best. So the report, we are working on a report to disaggregate the data. Another good thing that I would like to share, although it is in its preliminary stages, that during the COVID emergency, it was important to have data of schools where the COVID has hit, how many schools are closed across the country. So there has been collaborative work between NCOC, NITB, which is the IT board, the National IT board, and the Education Ministry to develop an education app that captures the data of all institutions, education institutions across the country. We've been able to gather information for about more than 290,000 institutes, and we hope that once we are able to populate that education app, we will have a better understanding of data across Pakistan. Because although we do publish public sector data on a regular basis, and all the provinces play a very important role in that, for private schools, there are usually estimations, and there is lack of full information on where all the private schools are and how many children are enrolled in them. So again, I would like to thank Areebah for sharing her findings. I hope that we can get hold of the presentation and make a note of the recommendations that are given and make them part of this, the new program that we'll be working on. And I would really like to thank SDPI for organizing this session and highlighting a very important issue. So unfortunately, I will not be able to stay on for the duration of the discussion, but I hope that Rabia and the other organizers will be able to share the proceedings and the other panelists' thoughts with us. Thank you very much, and hope you have a good session. Thank you.
Thank you. Umbreen Sahiba, can you? Oh, she's.
No, I'm here, Areebah.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
Yes, we just have one question for you. Although हम बाकी questions end पे ले रहे हैं, but because you have to leave, so if you could please just respond to that. So the question is around more localized content. You've already spoken about how the content around teleschool will be revamped. So if you could just share a little on that, and जब curriculum revision की बात हो रही है, तो फिर उसको teleschool में किस तरह से incorporate किया जाएगा going forward?
Okay, so even when we were working on the teleschool content, we initially received free content from 4 of our major edtech partners, and I'd like to acknowledge them here again: Talimabad, Sabak.pk, Sabak Muse, and Knowledge Platform. These were the 4 that sort of set the way for the other edtech partners to come forward as well. So after these 4, like, it was a floodgates that opened up, and we we discovered that there are so many edtech companies out there in Pakistan. Most of them, unfortunately, small startups with a smaller group of people. But the amazing thing is that all young, bright, innovative people fresh out of the universities. So it's been another, I would add that to a positive thing during the COVID, that young people have really, really come out as the strength of Pakistan. So the content that was there, we formed groups of subject teachers, and because at the federal level during that time, we only had access to the Federal Directorate of Education teachers, we formed groups based on subjects. More than 40, 50 teachers voluntarily got together because this was a time when we were experiencing literally a curfew-like lockdown situation. Those teachers reviewed the content, and believe me, looking at 25,000 videos is not an easy task. They went through the content and filtered it for our tele school. There was a team of young people from Allama Iqbal Open University's media department who stitched the lessons together to form what you see on tele school right now, because the edtech video lessons that were available were like a 10-minute lesson on teaching alphabet or a 5-minute lesson on science. So we had to put all this together based on the learning objectives in the curriculum. Right now, there is a group of teachers, again from the Federal Directorate of Education, who are looking at the 32 weeks of academics that the children have to go through, and they are identifying the key lessons that the children need to learn for academic excellence and academic proficiency. We don't want to make a lesson on everything. We want to focus on some of the conceptual aspects and focus on the key learning. For example, in maths, even teachers, students find geometry difficult or algebra difficult, or they find the fractions and factorization difficult. So we'll be focusing more on the lessons that are identified as difficult areas. One of the our other partners, Pakistan Maths and Science Alliance, looked at the exam data from grade 5 and 8 and identified some of the areas where children haven't excelled so well in exams. So we have an idea from our assessments, and very recently you may have heard about the other not so positive news that Pakistan appeared in the TIMS assessment, and we have not performed well in that at all. But for me, the positive thing is that we at least participated in an international assessment, and now we have a benchmarking to take forward. So we are analyzing that data as well. So the content that will be built will be based on the main areas that children have to focus on in schools, and focusing on science, mathematics, language learning, and some concepts of geography, social studies would be the ones that would be highlighted. And then again, like I said, we have national edtech partners. So the content is already very much contextualized to Pakistan. We are also in conversation with a group of people who have the permission from Khan Academy to make an Urdu version of Khan Academy. And if you people have ever used Khan Academy or are familiar with Khan Academy, you would know that they also focus on the conceptual aspects of learning, and they have really good content. So this group, hopefully, if we are able to move forward, will be developing Urdu version of the Khan Academy that would be available to our children through the e-Talim digital portal, where they could access countrywide. And again, there's a lot of emphasis on using local context, local examples. So not teaching using pineapples, but maybe using Karela that the children may be more familiar with. The next step would be then moving forward and trying to translate some of the key lessons, because again, all this is very expensive. The translation, the video lesson development. So we would have to be very, very careful on what we spend the money on and how efficiently we do that. We will be sharing the analysis of the 32 academic weeks and what areas are important to teach the children with our provincial governments, and we will get them on board as well to add to the content so that whatever is produced is usable across the country and not just at the federal level. I hope that answers your question, Areebah. Rather long answer, but just had to explain the context.
Well, thank you so much. This has added so much knowledge to, and I think just second follow-up question, you've also very sufficiently answered that as well. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you. And we will continue to badger you after the conference. And
always, always welcome. Thank you. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you. We'll move on to our next panelist. We have with us Wajeeha Bajwa. Wajeeha, आपका introduction बहुत अच्छे से राबिया ने पहले दिया है, so I won't go into details of that. We would love to hear your reflections on the conversation that's taken place already, and then of course we would want to learn from what you have to say. Although I have no moral ground to say this because I exceeded my time, but 10 minutes. All right, over to you, Wajeeha. Wajeeha, can you hear us? आपको unmute. Rabia, can we unmute Wajeeha?
Wajeeha, can you please unmute?
Hi, good morning and afternoon to everyone. Thank you so much for an excellent talk so far. So I have a presentation, but unfortunately there's something with the formatting. So I apologize for that. But if you don't mind, just for the sake of time, I would like to continue, if that's okay. So do I have the option of sharing my screen here?
Yes, you can.
Is it visible for you? Is this fine? Okay. All right, so today I'll be presenting on exploring the efficacy of digital education and tele-education on girls' schooling in Pakistan during the COVID-19 pandemic. I wanted to start this presentation by discussing digital divide. So as has already been mentioned, Pakistan has faced serious challenges to girls' schooling due to COVID-19 this year. And amongst the groups that stand to lose the most are girls who, in light of recent efforts over the past 20 decades by various stakeholders, including the government, CSO, private and PPP efforts to increase access, transition, and completion rates, are at risk of losing it. As we learned already, the public schooling system did quickly catch up to deliver education remotely via partnerships with edtech companies, as well as tele-education. But the effects of these efforts have been intersectional in the manner in which they trickle down to girls at the grassroots level. And this is the focus of the presentation, where I will explore the intersectional effects and related strengths and weaknesses of two key educational methods, which have already been touched upon: digital education and tele-education on girls' schooling. And I also list out a series of recommendations to complement what has already been discussed pertaining to these two approaches. I also discuss two approaches which we can consider as a substitute for these areas of these two educational methods, in the sense that they are low cost or no tech solutions. So basically, even before the pandemic arose in Pakistan, digital divides were prevalent in that the internet, computers, and mobiles reached out of the reach of the poorest populations. However, the formal schooling system was serving as a means to mitigate these divides, but this has been magnified disproportionately over this past year. And I've presented here at the end of the slide a few statistics. I won't go into details, but the main point is that even though radio, television is considered to be a more accessible technology compared to, for instance, a computer or the internet, when we look at the poorest households, the 0% of them have access to a television. And in addition to this, when it comes to women, even where there is access to digital technology, as has been discussed, in Pakistan, the gap between men and women who have access to tech is 37%. And this is, of course, very concerning because we're moving towards a global knowledge economy where digital skills are required to function. And so this lack in terms of traditional and digital technologies in the context of the pandemic is affecting girls disproportionately, who will now lack the skills that's going to be required to remain competitive in an increasingly globalized workforce. So this slide was basically the beginning of the discussion on digital education in Pakistan. So the main point here is that important advancements in the context of the pandemic have been made by the government and the provision of the digital education in collaboration with edtech companies such as Islamabad and Sabak, who were able to mobilize and quickly deliver it. However, the coverage of these technologies compared to the proportion of female student population, especially the poorest girls and those in semi-urban areas, has been limited. So Islamabad on its, in recent reports, cites a coverage of 500,000, whereas organizations such as Sabak counted around 100,000 at the start of pandemic. If we assume that slightly less than half of these recipients in the platforms were female, we still find major gaps to reach the millions of girls whose education has been curtailed. Another important strength of digital education in comparison to radio or tele-education in emergency situations is that it has the potential to be a more active form of learning with metrics that are easier to track. And if provision can be scaled up to reach more remote regions in the country, such as FATA and regions in KP, where there are strong supply side gaps for girls' schooling, this actually promises to be a substitute for formal education for marginalized girls beyond the emergency context. However, as has been discussed already, this will require concerted efforts, both in terms of infrastructure and financing. As for instance, in the border regions in FATA, internet connectivity was seized as of 2016, and similar challenges remain in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Balochistan. So this slide is basically, sorry, can I have just a second? Apologies. Okay, sorry, Areebah, I'll just speak. There's an issue with the presentation formatting. Apologies for that. So
No,
basically, yeah, I think it's fine if I talk. So overall, basically, the point that I make in the following slides is in terms of the weaknesses of ICT and digital technology, while the government and the EdTech collaboration is very praiseworthy, we do need to understand that girls, as has been mentioned, do have a lot to lose in terms of early marriages. So in this setup where constraints are imposed by poverty and infrastructure in the form of having access to ICT equipment, even in the cases where this is overcome through government support and provision of loans and so forth, mobility is still required. So for instance, at the higher educational level, it was reported that students, both male and female, had to trek up to 3 hours away from their villages and towns in a mountainous terrain to find an internet connection. And this is not a facility that girls in most conservative region will have, or those who are younger will have. So serious infrastructural inputs need to be made. Also, we need to be mindful, as has already been said, that digital education is not really a silver bullet, and we cannot deem it to be superior to traditional teaching and learning approaches, due to which the focus, as has already been mentioned in previous presentations and by the government, is that the focus needs to be on introducing SOPs to resume formal education for girls as soon as possible. And there's empirical evidence from across the world, including the developing country context, that virtual or blended learning approaches do not match the learning outcomes from traditional teaching and learning approaches. And the use of digital learning is generally discouraged when sufficient budgets required for upfront investments in ICT goods and infrastructure is not available, which of course has been and continues to be the case in Pakistan. Of course, there are ways around this in terms of innovative financing mechanisms. And if there's any interest in that, I'm happy to discuss it later on in this session. To conclude this portion of the presentation, I laid out a series of recommendations, which I'll share in the form of my PowerPoint slide later. But the main point is that there are 3 recommendations that should be borne in mind given the emerging lessons learned in terms of digital education for girls in Pakistan. One is that we already have a successful model of digital educational delivery at the higher educational level. So as a starting point, replication can simply trickle down from that level. Investment, of course, in ICT and infrastructure should be pursued on a consistent but incremental approach. And here, as an intersectional lens is recommended, so that we deal with girls who have the most to learn from losing out on their education and not being able to return to school. Improving the quality of digital education is also important. And here, using more interactive approaches such as flipped classrooms is recommended. And again, whereas the government and the private sector has come up with a solution where they are interacting through free of cost methods to deliver digital education and support, we should also keep in mind that there are other avenues which are free of cost, such as YouTube, Edmodo, and so forth, that traditional private schools in the country are using. So it can also be considered how to leverage these pre-existing resources to minimize and further increase the scaling up of digital educational delivery. And finally, as this point has already been made very strongly, the pursuit of partnership with stakeholders, not just the government and the CSO, but also the private sector, is important to comprehensively map out and enhance the capacity of digital educational delivery and the associated financing challenges. So I just finished talking about the strengths, limitations, and recommendations pertaining to digital education. I'd like to speak briefly about the main alternative to digital education in Pakistan, which, as we learned already, is television, which is available to more households compared to virtual education. The government has done a great job in terms of releasing tele-education. And while I wasn't able to find gender disaggregated ratings at the time of the preparation of this presentation, anecdotal evidence does suggest, for instance, a World Bank survey that was carried out in Punjab earlier this year indicated that even where households do have a television, as has been mentioned, often they do not have full knowledge of the programming and remote learning opportunities that are available. So only 1 in 3 families knew about remote learning and that they could use it for children. And additionally, as I mentioned, even the poorest households don't have access to television sets, and the government is already, of course, making arrangements to overcome this gap. And additionally, we also need to consider some issues, infrastructural issues that can affect digital, as was the case with digital education, can affect tele-education as well, which is electricity outages. So this is, of course, a long-term approach. So, making sure that while tele-school is occurring, there are no electricity outages in the area. Finally, there is evidence to suggest that in addition to tele-education, to introduce a more interactive element, the government introduced an SMS system, which gave coverage to about 250,000 students, in which they could contact teachers and engage with the programming. Of course, we're talking about millions of girls who are out of school here. So it is important that in addition to overcoming this more passive approach of tele-education, girls have the opportunity to perhaps call in while a lesson is occurring or send SMSs in order to ask questions or clarifications and introduce a more interactive approach, an active approach to learning throughout the broadcast. In terms of recommendations for television, as I said, with digital education, we have a very strong model of tele-education in the form of AIOU at the higher education level. So it's important to draw upon lessons and best practices regarding delivery that already exist and apply it to lower levels of education for girls to more quickly expand access. The second recommendation I have to this end that's also issued for virtual education is that, again, there's a need to invest for the poorest households in an incremental manner. And the government to this end is already providing subsidized equipment and loans. A system to collect gender disaggregated data on girls' learning outcomes and constraints under the programming, and projections for ratings for girls' viewership could also be quite useful. And this is important in terms of data in that, for instance, during the Ebola crisis, parents, teachers, and students were able to communicate with district educational authorities to communicate quickly in real time what was working, what was not working. And that, of course, had better learning outcomes for girls. And this is something that should be considered even in the context of Pakistan. So I'll basically conclude now by discussing that while digital education and tele-education cannot match the learning outcomes that are offered by formal schooling, as well as the socialization that is developed there, we need to recognize that even approaches such as radio or tele-education will reduce the digital divides and keep girls involved in learning. So despite the limitations of these approaches, at this point, it's important to ensure that learning does not stop. It's also important to recognize that in Pakistan, girls' schooling was suffering in some regions even prior to the pandemic. For example, in Kohistan, according to certain statistics, in 2018, only 22 girls made it to metric, and 90% of schools in the region had shut down because of some issues with not meeting infrastructural requirements in relation to the traditions in the area. So in this case, we should consider how COVID-19 offers a very unique opportunity to develop SOPs in virtual education and tele-education for public schools that can be mobilized beyond the emergency context and serve as a substitute for traditional education in regions where severe supply constraints in the form of lack of infrastructure or female teachers remain. And in addition to enhancing the government's capacity to deliver digital and tele-education even more efficaciously, we should also consider pre-existing resources that can be leveraged to reach out-of-school girls and those in remote areas. So to this end, one approach is to use the capacities of Pakistan Post and use regular mail for teachers to send schoolwork and communicate with the poorest marginalized girls in the country. Here, the government, for instance, could subsidize prepaid postage for poor students to use, and this could be used to deliver teaching and learning materials to families of out-of-school children. And I'm happy to discuss the methodology further if there's any interest, including lessons from foreign countries where this approach has been applied. And finally, Pakistan can also apply lessons from models in the health sector, such as the EPI program, to roll out at a large scale the concept of community health workers, who with some provision of training in tandem with virtual, digital, or other no-tech solutions, such as postal approaches, could ensure that girls remain focused on their learning and on track with their education. Thank you so much for your time, and apologies for the technical difficulties. I'm happy to share a copy of my presentation after this. I'll correct the issues that I had with it. So thank you for your patience.
Thank you so much, Wajeeha. I wish Umbreen Sahiba were here to listen to this presentation because it reinforces so many points that we discussed earlier with the Malala Fund research, and then the specific point about how distance learning, it doesn't always have to be passive. Students can be actively engaged in the process. I think that's something that really hit home. So we'd love to, once the panel is over, so we'd really request Rabia कि आपकी presentation हमारे साथ भी share करें, and then generally with a larger audience also. We will now quickly move on to our next panelist. We have with us Fajer, Rabia, Pasha. Fajer, we understand that Page has also conducted a very similar research to what we spoke about, and I'm genuinely very excited to learn because it would be very interesting to see कि क्या चीजें ऐसी हैं जो शायद जिनसे हम मजीद सीख सकते हैं, कौन से ऐसे aspects हैं जिस पे हमारी findings maybe are coinciding. So it's over to you. And then 10 minutes.
10 minutes, yes. I've got time right in front of me to just monitor myself. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. First of all, thank you very much for having me here, and it was wonderful listening to you, Areebah, and about the research. It's music to my ears because I think that's all I do day in, day out. So it's wonderful hearing you, Wajeeha, Umbreen. I tend to have regular conversations with her and the ministry. So it's good. It's good to see that this conference has been organized and with primary focus on girls. I think a couple of things that I want to. I'm not going to go into the stats because I think we've covered enough of that. A few things that I would want to really emphasize on, and this is based on research and our experience as well. And I would like to mention here that we run about 138 community-based schools across Pakistan at the moment. And these schools are based in the 55 most deprived districts of Pakistan with the highest number of our school children, poverty rate, and whatnot. Whatever we talk about when we're talking about the most marginalized communities, that's what we've been working with. I think, at this point in time, we've had a very challenging year. The whole 2020 has been quite difficult, and thankfully it's finishing. And I'm hoping that we will start the 2021 on a positive note, that there's vaccine there. Once the school comes back on, then things will improve, inshallah. I think at this point in time, we need to now move on with our discussion around COVID-19. See, what COVID-19 has really done is that it's really, really highlighted the inequalities in the system, the education system overall, and inequalities for girls as well. And I believe that as a country, and this, I think, this is where our federal government comes in, our provincial governments comes in, and the civil society comes in, that we need to have a short-term plan and we need to have a long-term plan, because I think we need to be very, very realistic in terms of the resources that we have on hand, both within the civil society and within the government as well, and the challenges that we have been facing. With the short-term plan, I think we need to focus more on I believe in tech, I believe in edtech, hardcore, but the issue is that there are so many challenges on ground, and some of things that you've already touched upon. For example, there is a huge scale awareness raising and community mobilization needs to be done to educate parents in terms of the technology-based solutions which are available, which they may be able to access if they can afford to do that. Because yes, we have seen an increase of smartphones in the country in the last couple of years, especially. So a lot of work has to be done on ground. Now, I compare that with the work that we've already been doing on ground pre-COVID, right? So even when we're setting up a school, which is basically the whole model is focused around, for example, Wajeeha touched upon using the local resources. It works around using the local resources because that's the most cost-effective solution we've found to especially engage girls, out of school girls across the country. So where you hire a local teacher, community-based teacher, you use a local building, you bring the whole community together. So there's a lot of community mobilization that has to be done, so community understands how important it is for their girls to go to school. So the local resources part is very important. I see, in the short-term plans, that's what we really need to focus on, because the challenges we have, for example, non-availability of internet in communities, in areas. For example, Gilgit-Baltistan, we've seen the connectivity is very poor. FATA connectivity is very poor. Balochistan, you go, connectivity is very poor. And this, I'm not talking about families who can afford internet, but these are your structural issues, which we cannot do anything about it. The government has to take steps. And I know there are, but then again, because the scale of these issues is so huge that it is difficult for these things to for us to overcome these challenges in a short term, right? So, but we do need to have that long-term plan. I agree with your point, Areebah, that we need to have a plan, and then we say where we're going to find the resources from to inshallah to address these challenges that we're facing. But these are the really real challenges. Now, for example, we have schools in Quetta, right? And in the schools in Quetta, we have families that don't own even a phone, not even a smartphone, but even a regular Nokia phone, right? So this is the level of poverty that you're dealing with. Now, what we did during COVID, for example, because all our teachers are local community-based teachers, that helped us making sure that we kept our girls and families engaged, because they handed out the worksheets, for example, going house to house literally, and making sure that each girl has been given worksheets on weekly basis, so they can continue some sort of work learning at home, and they would the teachers would then collect them. So the children are not coming together in one group, but the teacher was doing hats off to our teachers who put in so much effort during this time. Second thing that we really tried doing on our best was, for example, the food security point that we touched, that this has been such a huge issue that had become during COVID-19 due to loss of work, that our girls who'd been engaged through so much community mobilization were at risk of dropping out because there is serious food shortage now when you're looking at extreme families who are living under extreme poverty. So we ran ration drives throughout our star schools communities to help families. So there is at least some support that we can provide on that end. And that really helped us, because we've seen the results of those when the schools were open in September. And we had excellent feedback from the families based on the fact that they had that some support, which meant that they didn't have to keep the girls at home, for example, and engage them in child labor, right? So for us, that's a win-win situation, even though as an organization, food security is not our mandate, but we did that because we wanted to make sure our girls don't drop out. And right as we speak, we still have ration being delivered to families of our school children. So even though it was costly and we had to really shift our the work in that sense, but to make sure that food is available and ration is available to families as well. The other thing I think we need to also, in terms of recommendations, I would also add that mental health has been a huge challenge, and that has been a huge problem. It's an existing problem again, but obviously the current situation has added to it, especially for girls who've been going to school, girls who've been going into low-cost private schools, especially, where we've seen a lot of mental health issues. We've just conducted our research. We'll be publishing that very soon as well, in terms of what mental health impacts we've seen. And I really feel that once the children come back to school, and especially girls, once they come back to school, I am really up for the whole idea of the remedials and revisions, because the girls wouldn't have studied at home. They don't get the opportunity to do so. Girls are generally burdened with household work anyway, and taking care of their siblings. So they have been, they're generally put under a lot more pressure, and they are expected to take the burden on themselves. So curriculum wise, I think we need to go easily now for the next few months, and do catch-up sessions in terms of, so just to ensure children and make them feel comfortable and confident that they don't have huge amount of work to accomplish and to complete and to achieve, because they won't be able to, and that's just going to put them under extra pressure right now. And that goes for all the children, may that be children who are attending your elite private schools, low cost schools, or community based schools, or government schools. I think that's sort of something that is applicable to everybody attending schools at the moment. We then have an issue in terms of access to education for children who are out of school. Given that we have the second highest number of out of school children in the world, I think that's where the tech comes in. If we can plan long term blended learning solutions, and I would focus on that Pakistan really needs blended learning solutions, because that would engage the community engagement, that would engage the parental engagement. You need on ground solutions to be able to do that. And issues such as access to internet, where girls are not allowed to access internet, and because बच्चियां खराब हो जाएंगी का problem बहुत ज़्यादा है हमारा. So we have to do a lot of work, and blended learning has to be provided, but within the school setting. I think we are far away from that point where parents would accept that their children, or their girls particularly, can go online and attend an online session. Apart from the cost, I think that's a very realistic issue that we have, that the cost of tech is huge. And this is where I think the government needs to really invest in terms of your homegrown tech solutions. I'm not talking about the content. I think we have done quite a lot of work, and there are amazing organizations around already who've done a lot of work on content development. Further work needs to be done, but at least we're going in that direction. But when we're talking about local hardware solutions, we still don't find any feasible local good quality hardware solutions which would be more cost effective, rather than going for international brands, which are generally, even if the government steps in, then it cannot afford to provide tablets or laptops or smartphones to every single child who's been out of school, so they can access education at home. This is where I think smart board learning comes very handy for not for all schools, but yes, at least for a good portion of schools, smart boards could be used in the schools, because that becomes more cost effective instead of providing each child a digital device. Those can be very handy. What we also found was, we tried piloting an initiative using tablets with preloaded content that was successful, but the problem is the cost, because it's not, what we find is that it wasn't scalable at this point in time, at least. But preloaded content can be provided on the tablets where the tablets don't have access to internet. We can restrict the internet access. This is where we've not had much issue with the parents, particularly girls, using a tablet to access digital learning, but on the tablets, but not online learning, right? So I think these are the couple of things that we need to keep in mind. One thing that I really I don't see, and there's a serious lack of, is that whenever we're planning an initiative, and I would suggest, especially at government level, that really needs to happen, is whatever initiative is being planned, we need to have separate planning when it comes to girls, because it's for girls. We need to understand the challenges the girls are facing, because it's not as easy for them to just switch on a TV and attend the tele school, or just switch on the radio and attend the radio school, or whatever that may be, right? So I think this is where our work and your work comes. It's very important to highlight that girls' education challenges need to be recognized as a separate component when we're talking about any initiative at all, anything at all. And I really appreciate the teleschool that happened, because we do need to understand that we've got such a huge population that we're talking about, and we need to have and when you're talking about providing access to education, we do need to have all sorts of multiple types of education resources available for children. May that be through worksheets, may that be through online platforms, learning online classes, etc., teleschool, radio. These are all excellent initiatives and very much needed as well, because if anything, yes, at least 20% of the children access teleschool, and that, I think that's a great achievement in that sense. And I think this is where just the planning needs to be done and we need to think through. You see, when during pandemic, what's happened is that we've been firefighting, right? We've been trying to just come up with solutions quickly, and doing so, we may have put children under more pressure as well. You see, so as adults, we see things differently, and we need to really understand how it goes about, for children, and especially girls who have all the extra burden. We know that sexual abuse has increased in not just in Pakistan but globally during pandemic, and girls are at the forefront of it, unfortunately. Then we know that girls are at risk of early age marriages. We have all of these challenges. We know that girls are not allowed access to digital devices, and at times TV as well. So we have to keep all of these challenges in mind. And I think we've got amazing work going on at ministry level, because at least we've seen response. Because previously we haven't even seen responses, you see. So I think that's a great thing. But I think everybody needs to sit together. That should include all the key stakeholders from the civil society and people already working on girls' education in Pakistan, and come up with strategies and interventions to support the girls to access the initiatives. Multiple initiatives are going on, but the girls are not getting the access to those initiatives. And I think that's where more work needs to be done. That's where engagement, awareness raising, supporting of with nutrition and well-being, mental well-being and health, etc. All of that has to be taken into account when we're planning initiatives. And I think that needs to happen. Like you said, Areebah, the government has more resources than any of us. And we can support the government, we can come together, but the government has to take lead on it, because it doesn't have a choice. It has to take a lead on it, right? Because it's government's mandate to provide education to every child in Pakistan under the age of 16. That's the constitutional right of every single child in Pakistan, including girls. And that's where the planning comes in, that you're able to recognize the challenges the boys may have, the girls may have, any children facing any sort of disability may have. We have to keep all of that in mind when we're planning initiatives. So when we launch initiatives, yes, we are improving access to education, but then what about the segments, the vulnerable segments of the society? How much have we actually helped them? I think it would be great to actually carry out an in-depth study in terms of how much during this time the initiatives that have been launched were actually accessed by girls, and how much impact that has created as well. Because I think we need all of that data, as much data as possible, to be able to provide planning for future as well. And we need to now think post-COVID, because COVID would, inshallah, whatever, if vaccine is working, things get better, then in next 2, 3, 4, 5 months, things will start to normalize.
I think there is some internet connectivity issue, right?
I think we lost Fajer. We have our last panelist with us, and we're running short of time also. So we will move on to Dr. Fouzia Khan, and we would want to learn कि सिंध गवर्नमेंट के लेवल पे क्या चीजें हो चुकी हैं और क्या चीजें ऐसी हैं जो और टेक अप की जा सकती हैं. Fajer, thank you so much.
Sorry.
We lost you there for a moment.
I know why. I got disconnected somehow. I don't know why, but thank you. And just to conclude, just a couple of sentences. I think it's important that we now plan post-COVID in terms of and because I think we have enough understanding of challenges on ground, and we need to really plan post-COVID now, and make sure that girls who are out of school, who are at risk of dropping out of school, are engaged, and initiatives and social protection system is put in place for those girls as well, to make sure that we don't lose out on the work that's already been done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fajer. Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to listen to you. And we'll move on to our last panelist now, Dr. Fouzia. Thank you so much for joining us, and we want to learn from you कि सिंध गवर्नमेंट ने कोविड के दौरान क्या स्टेप्स ले चुकी है गवर्नमेंट, और जिस तरह फजर ने पॉइंट आउट किया कि we need to plan ahead. So once schools reopen, uske liye kya strategy hai? So over to you.
Thank you so much, Areebah. So let me first congratulate the SDPI for declaring the 23rd Sustainable Development Conference. And I would also wish to thank the organizers, SDPI and the Malala Fund for their joint efforts in organizing this mega event. Thank you so much for providing me this opportunity. So dear listeners, ladies and gentlemen, as we all are aware that the spread of COVID-19 has sent shockwaves across the globe, and the public health crisis unprecedented in our lifetimes has caused severe human suffering and loss of life. The exponential rise in infected patients and the dramatic consequences of serious cases of the disease have besieged hospitals and health professionals and put noteworthy strains on the health sector. As governments struggle with the spread of the disease by closing down entire economic sectors and imposing widespread restriction on mobility, the sanitary crisis involved into a major economic crisis, which is expected to burden societies for years to come. All this has implication for education as well, which depends on tax money, but which is also the key to tomorrow's tax income. Decisions concerning budget allocations to various sectors, including education, healthcare, social security, and defense, depend on countries' priorities and the prevalence of private provision of these services. Education is an area in which all governments intervene to fund, direct, or regulate the provision of services. As there is no guarantee that market will provide equitable access to educational opportunities, government funding for educational services is needed to ensure that education is not beyond the reach of some members of the society, as it was mentioned by our colleagues. So yes, there has been a huge focus on responding to education and learning during COVID-19 pandemic, and there has been a huge concern on how the disruption is impacting girls as a very vulnerable group, who will be the first to be pulled out of the school with income losses. With that, the learning opportunities would be taken away. Early marriages is also a major concern in Pakistan. Around 25% married prior to 18 years of age. So schools are not just places for learning, but in some cases, support spaces for social emotional learning, peer support, stability, nutrition, and health services to give some stability to girls and even boys who are coming from very unstable and fragile backgrounds. So even when government schools are not fully functional, they are still better places compared to the children's own home belonging to poorest and poor group. So the COVID-19 has generated some important evidence-based responses that fall in 2 to 3 categories from gender perspective. So I'll be focusing more on the gender perspective. So here I would focus on the impact of crisis on girls and their education. So the potential impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on girls' education are plentiful and varied. Most obviously, a number of schools around the world remain closed, which affected girls' education directly. But both research and advocacy pieces underline a host of other potential concerns that either directly or indirectly affects girl education and eventually their overall comfort. Thus far, most of the data from the current epidemic relates to access to distance learning. It is too early for us to predict with confidence the impact of the pandemic on dropouts and longer term outcome, but results from previous researches on pandemics and initial finding of the current one give us clues. Many of these channels affect boys' education as well. So we need to see what we can learn from previous school closure and crisis. Much of what we hypothesize about the impact of this crisis draws on what we learned from the previous crisis. So let's start with the most obvious, which is school closures. And of course, school closure leads to learning losses. We know that that's true that even during non-emergency school closures in both rich countries and poor countries, those learning losses can bear. After school closed for more than 3 months due to an earthquake in Pakistan, children learning level were significantly lower. Even several years after schools had reopened, kids who fall behind in school are more likely to drop out later. We also know that during school closures, girls may be tasked with more household work, including childcare, which can further cut into learning time. So the combination of school closure and the disruption of other health services can translate to increase likelihood of adolescent pregnancies, which despite recent credible moves in several countries to make it easier for girls to return to school, still make getting back to the school classroom more difficult. Travel restrictions likewise can reduce access to both reproductive health services and to safe spaces like after school girls clubs, which can also translate to increased adolescent pregnancy. Um, Loss of household income can also lead to girls marrying young as a mean to generate income for family through their dowry, especially if it compounded with unplanned pregnancy. So finally, an effect not from school closure directly from the previous health and financial crisis is that education budgets may get crunched both at the national level and at the household level. So during the East Asian financial crisis in 1990s, pre-existing disparities between boys and girls were worsening. Many countries still have gender gaps in access to secondary education, and budget crunches may slow down the expansion of secondary school, limiting opportunities for girls. Many of the same channels likely apply in the current pandemic, but data remain limited. So in terms of access to learning opportunities, while schools have been closed, there is no single story that applies across low and middle income countries. Across multiple countries, girls reported either less confidence in their computer skills relevant for distance learning or less access to the internet. But in some other countries, girls have reported at least slightly more access to ongoing educational opportunities than boys. So we haven't yet seen actual data on dropouts. Yes, we are expecting कि बहुत ज्यादा ड्रॉप आउट होगा जब अभी भी जब स्कूल खुले तो हमने देखा कि बहुत ज्यादा बच्चे स्कूल अभी वापस नहीं आ रहे हैं but as UNESCO predicts comparable rates of risk of not returning to school for boys and for girls, which translates to 5.2 million girls in primary or secondary school at risk. So let's refer to the Malala Fund, which does predict differential risk to girls based on experience in past epidemics, and a survey of head teachers in Ethiopia predicted higher dropout rates for girls in the wake of the school closures. A cross-country survey of frontline service organizations reflects similar concerns that girls will be more adversely affected than boys by school closure. More advocacy-focused pieces, some of them drawing an anecdotal evidence or learning from past crises, raise a host of additional concerns: early marriages, increased adolescent pregnancy, reduced access to health services, higher rates of dropouts among girls, less access to digital technology, and greater overall discouragement. So the measures of learning loss from a high income country don't report gender differences, but they do indicate both significant learning loss on average and increasing inequality both within and between schools. So on net, the early indication on access to distance learning do not suggest dramatic, consistent cross-country gender equality. But for the outcomes that matter, most getting girls back into school as they reopen, so we just don't yet have the data. In near future, the researchers from all over the world who are working on the same matter will continue documenting the impact of the crisis on girls' education and on their well-being more generally. At the same time, failing to act in the absence of better data is a losing strategy. By the time numbers come in, documenting in large teenage pregnancy and dropout rates, a window of opportunity to help at least some of these girls most effectively will have closed. So what to do? Learn from past disasters and devote in no regret policies. Make sure that girls have access to information and resources for productive health, social safety nets to mitigate the needs to enter the labor market, particularly in high risk work. And as school open, ensure that communities and schools make targeted efforts to get girls and ultimately all vulnerable children back in the classroom. referring to your comment initially, जो आपने अरीबा कहा कि what Sindh government is doing right now. So yes, we are working on a blended learning right now. We have condensed our curriculum, and we have developed like we have condensed it to around 50%. We have distributed work plans across the province, both for primary, for private and public sector schools. Right now, we are using two platforms. One is Microsoft Teams, on which we are working, and so we have trained around more than 500 master trainers for our secondary school, which is from grade 6 to 12. For our primary classes, that is from ECE to grade 5, we have developed SELD News app, which is available in 3 languages, Urdu, Sindhi, and English. So it is more parents and teacher based. Parallelly, like the schools right now, they are not, closed. Teachers are attending the schools, HMs are there, and we have developed a plan for children so that, staggered, it's a staggered plan, so the students can attend on different days and take their homework where the technology is not available, or accessibility or connectivity is the problem. So at the end, I would once again congratulate SDPI for hosting this event, and would extend my thanks for the invitation to be a part of this occasion. Thank you so much. God bless you all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fouzia. Very insightful, very helpful presentation, and it's really very good to know कि हम लोगों ने पेंडेमिक का जो पहला हिस्सा था उसमें बहुत सारे पब्लिक स्कूल्स because they could not effectively contribute in terms of distance learning, but it's great to know that the government is planning ahead, or hopefully in future emergencies, या even जो अभी पैच देख रहे हैं स्कूल क्लोजर्स का, इसमें बच्चों की रसाई, बच्चियों की रसाई तालीम तक phase 1 से बेहतर होगी इंशाल्लाह. We have gone already over time, so we do have to move towards conclusion. हमारे पास कुछ सवाल आए हुए हैं. मेरी कोशिश ये है कि मैं कुछ मुझे महसूस होता है बहुत सारे सवालों के जवाब हमारे पैनलिस्ट्स ने ऑलरेडी अपने डिस्कशन के दौरान दे दिए हैं. कुछ की मैं कोशिश करती हूँ कि इस वक्त कंक्लूड करते वक्त I try to respond to them. First, before we conclude, again, we certainly need to thank SDPI for arranging this panel today. Thank you so much. And then, of course, we need to, acknowledge Malala Fund. Within the wonderful annual conference, we've had this great panel and a lot of focus on not just education, but how to bring more girls back into the education system, and how our education system post-COVID now entirely needs to focus, has a very focused gender lens. जो आज के डिस्कशन से कुछ चीजें अगर हम उनको समराइज करें, आई थिंक जो वजीहा की बातों से रीअफर्म हुआ, जो फजर की बातों से रीअफर्म हुआ, डॉक्टर फौजिया ने जिन बातों को रीअफर्म किया, और जो हम लोगों की स्टडी की भी जो फाइंडिंग्स हैं, अनफॉर्चुनेटली गर्ल्स आर वर्स ऑफ. पेंडेमिक से पहले भी बच्चियों की रसाई तालीम तक लिमिटेड थी, और पेंडेमिक के बाद वो फर्दर कर्टेल हुई है. एक्सेस टू इंटरनेट या डिस्टेंस लर्निंग प्लेटफॉर्म्स एज अ होल ओवरऑल एक बहुत बड़ा इशू है, लेकिन खास तौर पे बच्चियां वंस अगेन आर एट द रिसीविंग एंड. सो अगर घर में इंटरनेट है भी, टेलीविजन है भी, तो क्या बच्चियों की रसाई होगी उन डिवाइसेस तक तालीम हासिल करने के लिए? ये बहुत बड़ा क्वेश्चन मार्क है, एंड वी कलेक्टिवली नीड टू फाइंड वेज, कन्विंस कम्युनिटीज to normalize girls' access to the internet or other distance learning platforms. We need, there's something very important Fajer mentioned, that yes, we need to, we certainly need a plan in place, remedial classes के हवाले से, catch up classes के हवाले से, learning losses को curtail करने के हवाले से, but the mental health of children should always be kept at the forefront. जो adults plan करें, उसमें it would be great. हम हमेशा child participation की बात करते हैं. The voices of children and the voices of girls need to be included in those in the overall decision making process. Finally, we feel कि हमारा जो disaster risk management plan है within education, and later once the schools reopen, it absolutely, this cannot be emphasized enough, and this is not just because our panel is talking about girls education. अगर हमें पाकिस्तान में जो हम education crisis की एक ज़माने से बात करते चले आ रहे हैं, अगर हम चाहते हैं कि वो education crisis ख़त्म हो जाए एक दिन, तो जब तक हम बच्चियों की तालीम को प्रायोरिटाइज नहीं करेंगे, जब तक एजुकेशन डिपार्टमेंट्स, मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ एजुकेशन, ओवरऑल एजुकेशन प्लानिंग जेंडर लेंस के साथ नहीं होगी, बच्चियों को सामने रख के नहीं होगी, हम अपने एजुकेशन क्राइसिस को कर्टेल नहीं कर पाएंगे. सो एब्सोल्युटली, वेदर इट्स disaster management plans, or whether going forward we're talking about a single national curriculum, or we're talking about bringing more children back to schools, making schools safer, increasing the country's enrollment and retention rates, gender has to be at the heart of all this planning. And yes, एक सवाल शुरू में आया था, and so before concluding I would want to respond to that. I do understand जो मैंने बात की कि रिसोर्सेज हम बाद में देखेंगे, प्लानिंग पहले करनी जरूरी है. आई डू अंडरस्टैंड बहुत लोगों को शायद महसूस होता है कि दिस इज नॉट per se the most realistic approach, but we are in the business of idealism, right? अगर हम लोग रिसोर्सेज को हमेशा सामने रख के प्लानिंग करेंगे, तो हमारी प्लानिंग, हमारी इमेजिनेशन हमेशा लिमिटेड रहेगी. Yes, we can make a larger plan and then prioritize short term, medium term, long term, and plan ahead कि हमने उनके लिए resources किस तरह लेकर आने हैं. लेकिन resources should not be at the heart of our planning. We have to first have a plan that is foolproof and is focused on bringing every child into the formal educational realm. और फिर हमने resources कहाँ से करने हैं, वो phase 2 होना चाहिए. This is what I feel, and I feel अगर हम लोग हमेशा realistic होकर सोचेंगे, तो हम लोग हमेशा limited रहेंगे अपनी approach में भी और अपने actions में भी. So I do feel that it is time to conclude the panel. We have gone about 15 minutes overboard. So thank you everyone, thank you so much, and I hope that even after this panel concludes, we will all be in touch and we will find ways to collaborate and make good things happen for our children. Thank you. Thank you.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Areebah and other panelists for doing such a wonderful job. And I thank you all the panelists and all the attendees for joining us today. And we will be definitely sharing the proceedings of the session with all of you. And after this panel, we have other session as well. Please, I invite you all, please attend those as well. So thank you and goodbye. Take care.